As the summer of 1914 spiraled into a global conflict, much of the world's attention turned to the thunder of artillery in Belgium, the trenches of France, and the frozen bloodshed in the east. But far from the mud and wire of the Western Front, a quieter storm brewed beneath the burning sun, one that would redraw maps and stir ancient rivalries in the heart of the Middle East. In the shifting sands of Arabia and along the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, a theater of war would soon erupt, hidden from European eyes, but destined to shape the future of empires and nations alike. The Ottoman Empire, long considered the sick man of Europe, stood at a precarious crossroads. Once the proud ruler of vast territories from the Balkans to Mecca, its golden age was behind it, eaten away by corruption, nationalist uprisings, and the encroaching powers of Britain and Russia. Yet, the declaration of war offered the Ottomans a desperate opportunity to reclaim relevance and territory by siding with Germany and Austria-Hungary. It was a gamble rooted in pride and strategic calculus. For the German High Command, the alliance offered a southern pressure point against the British Empire. For the Ottomans, it was a final throw of the dice. British officials in Cairo and Delhi were wary but distracted. The Suez Canal, lifeline to India and the jewel of Britain's imperial crown, lay dangerously close to Ottoman-controlled Sinai. Further east, oil-rich lands in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, beckoned like a glittering prize. There, British interests had quietly been drilling and scheming, securing not just economic assets but the right to march in, should the Ottomans falter. As such, the first blows in this forgotten war would not be waged by vast armies, but by cautious maneuvers and probing strikes. In January 1915, Ottoman forces launched a daring assault on the Suez Canal, hoping to cut the artery that kept Britain's empire alive. Turkish soldiers, exhausted and undersupplied, crossed the burning desert with German advisors pushing them forward. But the attack floundered. British Indian troops, dug in and better prepared than the Ottomans had expected, repelled the offensive. Though tactically small, the battle revealed the strategic stakes. Control of Egypt, the canal, and routes to the oil fields were vital. The Middle East was not a sideshow, it was a keystone. Back in Constantinople, Enver Pasha, the young and ambitious Ottoman Minister of War, envisioned a grand campaign stretching through Persia into Central Asia. But his dreams clashed with logistics and reality. The empire lacked the resources and infrastructure to support a prolonged war on multiple fronts. In Mesopotamia, British and Indian forces moved swiftly, capturing the port of Basra by November 1914. The plan was simple: protect oil interests and move up the Tigris and Euphrates to secure Baghdad. But the simplicity of the plan would soon prove deceptive. Among the British officers was General Charles Townshend, a man of sharp ambition and colonial arrogance. By 1915, Townshend had pushed his troops deep into Ottoman territory, reaching the outskirts of Kut al-Amara, a small town on a bend of the Tigris River. Believing the Ottomans weak, Townshend advanced further toward Baghdad, only to be met with fierce resistance. Outmaneuvered and forced to retreat, he withdrew to Kut and prepared for a siege. The Ottomans, under General Halil Pasha, encircled the town, cutting off supplies and reinforcements. What followed was one of the most humiliating chapters in British military history. Over 13,000 Allied troops, mostly Indians, were trapped. Disease spread, food ran out, and rescue attempts failed one after another. After 5 agonizing months, Townshend surrendered in April 1916. The loss was staggering, not just in lives but in morale. For the Ottomans, it was a rare and glorious victory. For the British Empire, it was a slap to the face in front of the Arab world. Yet, beneath the surface of Ottoman triumph, cracks were spreading. Arab subjects of the empire, especially in the Hejaz and Syria, had grown resentful of Turkish rule. The Young Turk government had imposed centralizing reforms that ignored tribal traditions and religious autonomy. The execution of Arab leaders suspected of dissent further inflamed tensions. British intelligence, always opportunistic, saw an opening. In Cairo, a bold plan began to take shape. If the Arabs could be persuaded to rise against the Ottomans, the British could open a new front without committing large numbers of European troops. Promises were made of independence, of recognition, of a new Arab state. These promises, often contradictory and crafted with diplomatic vagueness, were offered to Sharif Hussein of Mecca, a Hashemite noble descended from the Prophet Muhammad and protector of Islam's holiest cities. Hussein, skeptical but pragmatic, demanded proof. That proof would come in the form of arms, gold, and an obscure British officer named T.E. Lawrence. Fluent in Arabic and possessed of a romantic idealism about Arab independence, Lawrence would soon embed himself among the desert tribes, setting the stage for a revolt that would fracture the Ottoman hold on Arabia and shock the European war effort. But that chapter had yet to be written. For now, the Middle Eastern theater simmered with unrest. Ottoman forces, though victorious at Kut, were stretched thin. British resolve hardened, and reinforcements flowed into Basra. In the north, the Caucasus campaign with Russia sapped Ottoman strength, while in the south, a fire was beginning to glow among the dunes, one that would soon explode into revolution. As the year 1916 unfolded, the Forgotten Front was no longer silent. It crackled with intrigue, betrayal, and the first rumblings of a struggle that would not end with the war, but echo far into the future. The Arab Revolt officially ignited in June 1916 with a thunderous volley of gunfire outside Mecca as Sharif Hussein's followers struck Ottoman garrisons in a bid to reclaim Arab autonomy. It was not just a rebellion, it was a calculated gamble made under the distant encouragement of British promises. The Ottomans, caught between the grinding fronts in Europe and their stretched lines in Mesopotamia and the Caucasus, suddenly found a new and dangerous fire burning across the Hejaz. This revolt, while regional on the surface, would soon prove to have outsized impact on the shape of the post-war Middle East. The man destined to shape the revolt's narrative in Western memory was T.E. Lawrence, a young British intelligence officer whose understanding of Arab tribal politics made him an unlikely but indispensable figure. Unlike many of his peers, Lawrence did not view the Arab world through the usual lens of imperial disdain. Instead, he admired its traditions, its poetry, and its fractious politics. But he was no neutral observer. He was, in essence, a liaison and a manipulator, tasked with aligning tribal agendas to British objectives. By late 1916, Lawrence had embedded himself with Faisal, one of Hussein's sons and a rising leader among the tribal factions. The two men forged a cautious alliance. Faisal sought real independence for Arabs. Lawrence hoped to deliver military success and fulfill, at least partially, the promises made in London. Their collaboration would result in one of the most unconventional campaigns of the war. Avoiding large-scale battles, Faisal's forces, with British support, struck at Ottoman supply lines, railroads, and outposts. They moved with the unpredictability of desert wind, disrupting the Hejaz Railway and forcing the Ottomans to divert troops to protect their vulnerable southern flank. Meanwhile, in the Mesopotamian theater, British forces regrouped. The humiliation of Kut had lit a fire under Whitehall, and reinforcements flooded in under the command of General Frederick Maud. Unlike his predecessor, Maud combined caution with strategic vision. By March 1917, he had recaptured Kut and pushed forward to seize Baghdad. The Ottomans, unable to match the renewed British momentum, fell back, and the ancient city, once a jewel of the Abbasid Caliphate, fell into British hands. It was a symbolic and strategic victory. Control of Baghdad gave the British a psychological upper hand and a foothold deep inside Ottoman territory. But the Arab Revolt remained Britain's most delicate and dangerous wager. While publicly cheering the uprising, London was also secretly negotiating with France over how to divide Ottoman lands after the war. These discussions produced the infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret 1916 treaty that drew arbitrary lines across the Levant and Mesopotamia, carving out spheres of influence for the two empires. The agreement directly contradicted the pledges made to Hussein and his sons about post-war independence. Though the Arabs would not learn of this betrayal until later, the seeds of post-war disillusionment were already sown. On the ground, Lawrence and Faisal pressed northward. Their campaign was slow but deliberate. Each success, the capture of Aqaba in July 1917, the sabotage of key railway lines, chipped away at Ottoman logistics and morale. The Hejaz, once a stable Ottoman province, had become a quagmire. Turkish forces found themselves harassed by elusive Bedouin raiders who appeared and vanished with frightening speed. What they lacked in heavy weapons, the Arab forces compensated for with mobility and intimate knowledge of the terrain. In Cairo, British command was divided. Some saw the Arab forces as a nuisance, useful only so long as they served British goals. Others, including Lawrence, believed that empowering the Arabs would bring about a genuine new order in the region. But strategic calculations always trumped idealism. The main Allied effort was now shifting northward toward Syria and Palestine, where General Allenby prepared a decisive thrust against Ottoman strongholds. By the autumn of 1917, Allenby had assembled a powerful force, a mix of British, Indian, Australian, and New Zealand troops. On December 11th, he entered Jerusalem without a shot fired in the city itself. It was a moment rich with symbolism, an English general walking on foot through the holy city, promising respect for its religious sanctity. The fall of Jerusalem marked another blow to Ottoman prestige and accelerated the collapse of their empire's southern flank. While Allenby advanced from the west, Lawrence and Faisal moved from the east, linking their campaign with the broader British push. But it was increasingly clear to Lawrence that the future promised to the Arabs might never materialize. He began to see the outlines of betrayal: French demands for Syria, British interests in Iraq, and a growing sense in London that Arab independence was expendable. The conflict between vision and reality weighed heavily on Lawrence. He had encouraged Arab leaders to rise up with hopes of freedom, but now those hopes appeared likely to be sacrificed for European geopolitics. Still, the campaign pressed on. With every skirmish and captured outpost, the Ottomans were forced further back, their control disintegrating under pressure from both conventional and irregular forces. By early 1918, the Middle Eastern theater was approaching its climax. The Ottomans, reeling from defeats across all fronts, struggled to maintain any semblance of control. The Arab Revolt had fractured their hold on Arabia. Allenby's forces were poised for a breakthrough in Palestine. And in Constantinople, the Young Turk leadership, exhausted and disillusioned, began to see the writing on the wall. Yet despite the mounting victories, a cloud loomed over the outcome. The Arabs, whose loyalty had helped unravel the Ottoman hold on the region, remained in the dark about the true shape of the post-war settlement. Lawrence, increasingly torn between duty and conscience, found himself caught in a tightening web of empire and ethics. As the desert winds blew across the shattered railways of the Hejaz and the British marched through ancient cities, the battle for control of the Middle East shifted from bullets to diplomacy. The war was not yet over, but already the great betrayal was taking form, one that would echo for generations beyond the guns of 1918. By mid-1918, the Ottoman Empire was bleeding from multiple wounds, but none more damaging than the one inflicted in the Middle East. In the sands of Arabia and the highlands of Syria, A patchwork of British-led campaigns and Arab tribal uprisings had stripped the once mighty empire of its southern provinces. The coordinated thrust from General Allenby in the west and Faisal's Arab irregulars in the east formed a pincer that choked Ottoman logistics and morale alike. What had started as a regional uprising now evolved into a crucial pressure point in the global war, and the fate of an entire region hung in the balance. Allenby's plans for a final offensive were precise and ruthless. The Battle of Megiddo, launched in September 1918, was a masterpiece of deception and speed. While Ottoman commanders still expected a frontal assault near Gaza, Allenby sent his cavalry through unexpected mountain passes, flanking their positions and collapsing their defense. Within days, the Ottoman Eighth Army had disintegrated, and chaos spread like wildfire. As Ottoman forces retreated in disarray, they left behind weapons, supplies, and thousands of prisoners. The path to Damascus lay open. Faisal's Arab forces, moving swiftly from the east, were given permission to push toward the symbolic heart of Arab nationalism, Damascus. Lawrence rode alongside them, haunted by a growing internal conflict. He had promised liberation, fought for autonomy, yet increasingly sensed that European diplomats had already bartered Arab freedom away behind closed doors. Still, Damascus held meaning. It was to be the political and emotional capital of a new Arab world, born from the ruins of empire and forged in war. As the Arab army entered the city in early October 1918, the atmosphere was triumphant and tense. Turkish troops had withdrawn, leaving a power vacuum. Faisal's men, tribal warriors, former Ottoman deserters, and idealists, marched into Damascus with dreams of statehood. A provisional Arab administration was declared, but it stood on shaky ground. French ambitions for Syria, backed by secret wartime agreements, were already being asserted in distant capitals. Lawrence watched from the sidelines as events in Damascus unfolded. The joy of victory was soured by the duplicity of empire. British officials began to pull back support. French representatives, newly emboldened, claimed Syria as their right. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, once a vague piece of diplomatic fiction, now manifested as a political weapon. The Arabs, Lawrence knew, were not to be allowed full independence, not in Syria, nor in Lebanon, nor even in Palestine. It was in this moment of victory that Lawrence withdrew. His task, however painful, was complete. He left Damascus a celebrated but conflicted figure, burdened by the knowledge that his role had helped raise hopes that would soon be dashed. Faisal, meanwhile, attempted to hold the city together under Arab rule, walking a tightrope between British half-promises and French ultimatums. The Arab administration, short-lived and unsupported, would collapse under pressure within 2 years. In London and Paris, diplomats carved up the Middle East with little regard for the people who lived there. The 1919 Paris Peace Conference, instead of fulfilling Wilsonian dreams of self-determination, became a cold exercise in imperial division. Britain secured Iraq and Palestine under League of Nations mandates. France took Syria and Lebanon. The Arab world, which had bled and fought in hopes of sovereignty, was bound instead by new colonial chains, this time not Ottoman, but European. Scottish soldiers who had fought alongside Bedouin raiders returned home with tales of camels and cavalry charges, while Arab fighters who had envisioned unity now saw their lands divided by lines drawn in foreign ink. The Middle East, once a mosaic of Ottoman provinces, emerged from the war fractured, resentful, and betrayed. Lawrence returned to England a reluctant celebrity. He wrote his memoirs, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, not just to chronicle events, but to exorcise the guilt that clung to him like desert dust. In public, he remained loyal to the crown. In private, he raged at the betrayal he had witnessed. He never returned to Arabia. Faisal, after being forced from Damascus by French troops in 1920, was installed by the British as King of Iraq. a consolation prize engineered to soothe wounded pride. He ruled with grace and pragmatism, yet never forgot the dream of a unified Arab state. That dream, crushed by foreign diplomacy, would fester and echo across generations. The Middle Eastern theater of World War I remains, even today, a study in paradox. It was a theater of bold promises and quiet betrayals, of unlikely alliances and deep betrayals. Victory came not with clarity, but with complication. The guns fell silent in November 1918, but the forces unleashed in the desert campaigns would ripple for a century. What might have been a moment of liberation became a long, painful prologue to new forms of domination. The Arab Revolt succeeded militarily, but its political legacy was hijacked before it could take root. As the sun set over Damascus in 1918, it marked not the beginning of Arab independence, but the start of a new, more complex struggle for self-determination. The war had ended, but the consequences were just beginning.